Everybody tells you the same thing before you hire someone. So I did. For years, everything I do is written down somewhere. Instructions, project folders, agents that run the work. When I finally hired a publishing assistant, I was ready for the hard part. Well, the hard part never showed up, at least not in the way that I predicted. She was running the work on day one, not learning the ropes, like running it. What actually cost me a week was something nobody warned me about AI. And it had nothing to do with the documentation part. It was the plumbing, in a sense. Welcome back to the Ops and Gnome podcast. I'm Baldo Garza. This one's going to be a little bit different because I'm reporting from the middle of the project rather than just like the far side. I've just brought in some help for the first time in a long time, and I've been converting my personal AI setup into a team or organization setup at the same time. And if you've never done this before and you've been thinking about it, then you're going to learn to think about things that you hadn't thought about before. And if you haven't thought about it before, then this will give you kind of an idea of what that process looks like and why you would even do that in the first place. So here's the thing I want to give you today, and I'll say it plainly. Documenting your work is not the thing standing between you and getting help. It's your infrastructure. You built everything assuming one person would use it, meaning you or one other person. You just never had a reason to find out. So there's 3 things I'm going to walk through in this video. 1, why the scary part turned out to be the easy part. 2, what actually cost me a week. And the one signal that tells you a hire is working, which is not ours, and that surprised me. The first thing I handed over was show notes, creating them, uploading them, publishing them for one of the brands that I work with. Now, I've been doing this myself forever now, I guess, and sure, AI, like the process now is a little different because AI helps with so much of it, but like the process has been exactly the same for like 3-4 years now. And in my head, that job was going to take a while to explain because it's the kind of thing where, well, you know once you see it, or at least lots of it is, or I thought it was. But like SOPs, documenting has always, like people have always, I'm sure, told you like you should document it all, and some form of it exists. Well, because of that part, like that has been working so well in the same way in so many different iterations of it, it took almost nothing. And I want to be specific about why, because this is the part where like people get it wrong, right? It wasn't because I'm not a good trainer. It's because I didn't hand her, my assistant, a task. I handed her an agent, right? I already built a thing that does the work. The judgment was already in there, like what to pull out, how to frame it, like what the format is. So the handoff wasn't like, here's how I think about show notes. It was, here's the system, like, why don't you run it? And I think that also empowers her from the sense that she can get creative, right? Because I'm very open to like, if she sees something like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this instead of that? And so it allows for creativity without breaking the system, right? Because we know that the process works, and having the new eyes on it, there's always room for like, what if we like did this order instead? As far as like the show note, like being published. And so I always feel that empowering a person with creativity is never a bad thing. But at the same time, she's not doing anything differently that I was doing. She's just like now running the actual system. That's the payoff for all that documentation that nobody wants to do. Not that your new hire has a manual to read, is that the system is the training, right? The system is the training. You skip the whole like apprenticeship and because there's like nothing to apprentice. The knowledge isn't in your head waiting to be transferred. It's already sitting in the thing that does the job. But there was one gap slightly, like whenever some of those show notes get transferred into YouTube, there's like a handful, and not the show notes part, there's a handful of selections if you've ever uploaded a video to YouTube of like, add the tags and like pick a playlist and is there a collaborator? And it's like, hey, would you like to monetize? And like, hey, did you approve this? And like, there's a lot of little things like that I kind of did on the fly because it's almost like based on what the podcast was about or what the video was about, it would go into one of many different playlists that were created so that way things can be organized within YouTube. And I guess I noticed like, okay, well, there was never a process for that. That part was in my head, but it was an easy one to capture. And I had never written any of those down, not because they were hard to do, but because like they were kind of invisible. It was just like the last step. It wasn't really a process in my mind. It was more of like YouTube requires this, so I'm just going through it. And it was just something that I would just click on. And there was a little bit of in the moment decisions, and I don't think that they had to be. And I didn't realize that until like I was like, oh, I guess you do have to do all that stuff that I had forgotten that needed to be done. But and that's the honest like failure mode of documentation, by the way. It's not that the complicated stuff you skip. Now, by the way, if you haven't used this feature, Claude has now like a record feature and it's on Cowork, right? And it's like you click on it and then you start doing the thing and then it just records records the processes and creates an SOP out of it. And in my case, I would take that SOP and add it to project and folder so that way the agent or Claude knows what to do every time. So that was the small gap. We fixed it in one session. But again, that was supposed to be, in my mind, the hard part of it all. It was maybe 2% of the work. So here's how the week went and where I lost the week. To give somebody access to the way that I was working, I had to move the entire AI like Claude setup from like just being a personal account to being an organization account. And that like turned out to be like the real project. If you've never done that before or even thought about it, like it is a project in itself because first of all, I'll tell you, like you can't just share your login because Claude will flag that. And you might think like, well, why does it matter? Because you're going to use the credits. And if you need to pay for more, then you pay for more. I mean, obviously that's what I thought too, but there's more to it. Plus you didn't want to because then like you're stuck with like always having to approve like if they signed in with Google or they signed in with like your sign-ins, like you want them all, you want your employees or your helpers or your contractors to have their own logins without having to like always hit you up with like, can you approve it? Can you approve it? And so for me, that in itself is part of it, but there's other reasons as well too. But just a few things that I ran into that I can tell you right now, like project memory. If you notice, like with all the AIs, there's like a memory part, like that part you can't really touch. There's a context area as well, and you can touch the context area. Like you could feed it a folder, for example. But the memory part, what I ended up having to do is try to feed it again and run it. So that way I can kind of have the new folder, the new project folder, and the new team account create its own new similar memory. It's a process, but the context I obviously can, like I built that inside a project and that lives in the project. So moving to a team account, it's not necessarily a copy and paste. There is a real cost of rebuilding the context that, if you think about it, like if you've been running that for months, it accumulated over months. So like trying to do that in like a click, it's not really gonna work. Now, as I think about it now, if I ever have to move it again, which I'm already planning for that, I'm making sure that the context and the memory are simultaneously being written into a doc in a drive. So that way next time I can just point to it. And it doesn't do that automatically, by the way. It keeps everything internal. So like if you think, doesn't it already do that? It doesn't. It does save files into like a drive, or like anytime it spits out something for you, it does like save it somewhere. And you do have to pick a folder, right? Like of where do you want Claude to be operating from or ChatGPT, but it's not necessarily memory or context it feeds into or feeds from unless you've specifically set up the project folder in that way. Another thing that happened was connectors, right? When you switch to a team account, you have to approve connectors to the organization level, and then you have to approve them again for each individual's person's level. So in this case, it's me and my publishing assistant. So now there's basically two. We will be adding more, especially if I want to add extra people to the team account, whether that be contractors or other employees, etc., that I will have to approve them from, right? And so that wasn't an easy like just go ahead and use the connectors, there was a process of like having to approve the sign-ins and all that. And so that in itself took some time. It's not like a huge big deal. It's not a bug. It makes total sense. You actually, if you think about it, you just sit there wondering like, why isn't this working for her when it works for you? And that's, again, if you're hearing this, then like it won't be a problem for you because like you're already thinking about that because I just told you that, but I hadn't thought about that. I didn't know that, right? And every tool for every account, every place my work touches, all of it is set up under the assumption that, or was set up under the assumption that exactly one person was ever going to sign in. And so one thing I also recommend is stop using Google as a sign-in for things because then it's always going to be attached to that Google. And then you have to go through this, which I have, go through this whole process of having to go unattach Google sign-ins to all these different things so that way the people that you're working with can also have their own sign-ins. Unless they have a situation where like you can add an admin to that account, but many places don't, right? Like, or they want to charge you for an admin. And so in those cases, maybe you do want to share a login for say like Riverside, which is what I'm using here. And if I had a Google sign in, then anytime she wanted to use, she'd have to sign in with Google. But like I chose not to use a Google sign in, which is easier when you're setting it up. And I just have to create my own password so that way she can just use the password that we created. And there's never a situation where like I have to approve it because the password is what it is. Anyways, neither of us knew that or what the migration was going to take. That's the honest version. I didn't underestimate it. I just hadn't estimated it at all because it never occurred to me that it was a step. And that's the pattern I want to name. Everything I know how to do was written down. Almost nothing about how I worked was set up to be shared because I was the one doing it. And that's just, I guess, growth. That's how growth is. But it's two completely different kinds of readiness. And the entire like document your processes conversation only covers the first one. Think about what that means for a second. Every tool you've adopted, every automation you've wired up, every account you've opened, you set it all up as if there's only one person working it, right? It works great, it's efficient, and it has a single point of failure wearing your face. So like it's all up to you, right? So you don't discover that by writing an SOP. You discover it by the first time you try to let somebody else use it. This is not the first time I discovered this either, by the way. It's like I have discovered this before, but it's just it's a different level when you're trying to set it up for like AI, all its capabilities. So now the part I didn't expect, paying for 10 hours a week, right? So I'm actively hunting for more to hand her. I'm adding a third project for her this week and I'll keep going. That's the real method I'd point you to. I want to be careful here because the tempting version of this story is, look how many hours I got back. I'm not going to give you that number because I never did any of those tasks like on their own block of time. There was always like smashed in between like, I'm going to do this while doing this and while doing this. And I'm sure that's how a lot of people end up doing, especially with AIs. Like, oh, you can run this while running that, which in a sense it's efficient, but at the same time, there is an inefficiency that the more project you're running on one single like instance of the AI or the LLM working, the slower it does any one of those things. Like, it's like, but I have a fantastic, like newest, most updated computers. Like, sure, it just means that one's better than mine, maybe. But if it did the one thing on its own, it would still do it a tad bit faster. But so the story again is not like, look how many hours I got back, but any hours like I saved kind of gives you like a guess of what the final result of our hours saved would have been. So forget the hours. Here's the actual signal. The other day, she was working on something on Shopify for a company of mine. And I noticed, she noticed that a product that we were promoting or that we are promoting had a low amount of units in inventory. She flagged it to me, told me she noticed that and offered an option of what she could do about it. Now, that's nowhere near her lane. Inventory is not anywhere remotely in her job. I did tell her no action needed, but I also thanked her about it because I'm glad that she took the initiative for that. And I want to be clear about how big of a deal that was because I've had a previous assistant before And in all that time, nothing new ever came back. The work got done. And like, again, nothing new ever came back. There was no new suggestions. But at that time, maybe I wasn't as good as documenting. And so there was a lot of like, what else do I need to do again? And I think that was a learning process for me and for me as far as like writing down the documentation, but also for me in the sense of like how to get better at the hiring part. So same week, different version of it. I do small versions on Riverside, like small edits. And I mentioned it in passing. And I asked, like, do you happen to know how to do any editing? And she said, well, show me and how you do it and what you mean. And I did. And she was like, oh yeah, I can definitely do that. That's not difficult. And then she did one and I was like, sweet. So that was an part where it was a task that I had never even thought about delegating or even, just not thought about like that I could hand that off or that I even needed to because it was such a small thing. But it is part of the process of the rest of what her actual processes are. And she's like, well, I can just do that and like I don't have to wait for you. And to me that's such a relief, right? Because it's like, well, I don't want anybody waiting for me to do what they have to do. And like, I don't want to be the cog in the whole process. But the fact that it came from her as well, too, I'm just so thankful. And obviously, if you're listening to do what you are because you work on a bunch of this stuff for me, like, again, thank you for that. And so that's the test. It's not like throughput. It's not hours. Whether the person hands you things you didn't ask for, because the first version is a pair of hands, and a pair of hands only ever gives you back exactly what you hand over. The second version is somebody watching the business. Those cost about the same, and they are not the same thing at all. And I push one step further. You only get the second version if there's something to watch. If everything is locked in your head and your accounts, there's nothing for anyone to notice. The systems aren't just how you delegate, they're the surface area that make it possible for somebody else to see something you missed, right? So again, the systems aren't just how you delegate, they're the surface area that makes it possible for somebody else to see something that you missed. So this is where all of this lands for me. I've been spending some time recently looking hard at other people's businesses, like reading how they run, what they take to operate, what happens to them when the founder walks out, either because they're retiring or because they're just done with that business. And once you start doing that, you cannot stop doing it on your own. Like, you just can't stop doing that to your own business. Here's the question it leaves me with. A business that only runs because you're in it isn't an asset. It's a job you can't quit. Most of us who like have built something on real expertise are somewhere on that line without knowing exactly where. And that's there's only really one way to find out. You try to let someone in and you watch what breaks. For me, what broke wasn't the knowledge. It was every assumption I baked in that I was the only one who'd ever be standing there. That's fixable. It's just not the work you were told to prepare for. If you're anywhere near this, like thinking about your first hire or exiting your company, or you made one and it hasn't clicked yet, start where I did. Don't start with like a manual. Start by building one thing that does the work without you in it. And we live in a time that it's easier than ever to do exactly that, to build a thing that does the work without you in it, so that when somebody shows up, you have something to hand them instead of something to explain, right? And you can read all the books, right? Like how to like buy and sell businesses, or how to like create systems and processes, and like how SOPs, and you've always heard the assumptions or like the advice that this is what you should do for your business, so you don't have to rely on you or anyone. Like, you can hand that over, but it's only getting easier to practice the writing things down and hand things over. So that's what I challenge you for, and that's what I've been challenging myself for. There's an email agent, right, that I offer for free. Yes, my company helps with, like, if you want to take the free offering and like make it like even more powerful, then we can help you do that. It triages my inbox 3 times a day. It runs whether I'm paying attention to it or not. And it's probably the clearest example I've got of a system that can change hands. I put it all together in a free kit, the instructions, the setup, like everything. It's linked below. Go take it apart. like tell me like, oh, I tried it, but it didn't work here. Like, great. Look, that's how we make it better. And I have had some people like, oh, but it doesn't work in this case. Like, oh, that's because we can do it this way. And then we just redo the project folder instructions, and we're offering it for free, but we're letting people go back in there and like download the instructions so you can always update them, and it'll work better for you. But that's it for this one. If you think it was useful, send it to somebody that who's been putting off getting help, or take it in again and see what it does for you. But get the email agent. Trust me, it helps. It saves you tons of hours, and let me know how it goes for you.